Captain Thomas Mitchell had been protecting the royal family for 15 years. His tall frame and steady eyes made him the perfect choice for guarding the young princes. Today felt different, though. Something in the air at Kensington Palace seemed heavier than usual. Thomas stood at his usual position outside Prince George's study room. The 10-year-old prince was inside working on his homework with his tutor. Through the slightly open door, Thomas could hear the gentle murmur of voices discussing mathematics problems. He had watched George grow from a tiny toddler into this thoughtful young boy who always said, "Please," and "Thank you" to everyone. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the palace hallway. Thomas noticed how the light created dancing shadows on the ornate carpet beneath his polished boots. He had stood in this same spot hundreds of times, but today his mind kept wandering to his own son back home. Little Michael was only 8 years old, just 2 years younger than Prince George. Thomas rarely got to see Michael because his royal duties demanded so much time. He missed bedtime stories, football matches, and school plays. His wife Sarah often sent photos, but it wasn't the same as being there to ruffle Michael's hair or help him with difficult homework. A soft knock on the study door interrupted Thomas's thoughts. Prince George's tutor, Mrs. Henderson, stepped out carrying a stack of books. She smiled warmly at Thomas, as she always did. "The young prince is finishing up his essay," she whispered. "He's writing about heroes today. Quite thoughtful for his age." Thomas nodded politely. Mrs. Henderson had been working with George for 3 years now. She often mentioned how kind and considerate the prince was, unlike some royal children who could be demanding or spoiled. George seemed different, more aware of others around him. As Mrs. Henderson walked away, Thomas heard Prince George's chair scraping against the floor inside the study. The boy was probably stretching after sitting for so long. Thomas straightened his shoulders and checked his watch. Almost time for the prince's afternoon break. Suddenly, Thomas's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He carefully pulled it out, making sure to stay alert to his surroundings. It was a text message from Sarah, his wife. The words made his heart skip a beat. "Michael fell at school today. Broke his arm. At hospital now. Doctors say surgery needed. Wish you were here." Thomas felt his chest tighten. His little boy was hurt and scared, probably asking for daddy. But Thomas was here, miles away, protecting someone else's child. He had sworn an oath to serve the royal family, but right now that oath felt like chains around his heart. He quickly typed back, "On my way as soon as I can get coverage. Kiss him for me." But even as he sent the message, Thomas knew it might be hours before he could leave. Royal security protocols didn't allow guards to simply walk away, even for family emergencies. He would need permission from his supervisor, paperwork would need to be filed, and a replacement guard would have to be found and briefed. Thomas slipped his phone back into his pocket and tried to focus on his duties, but his mind kept creating images of Michael lying in a hospital bed, his small arm in a cast, wondering why Daddy wasn't there to make him feel better. The study door opened wider, and Prince George stepped out. He was a handsome boy with sandy, brown hair and bright blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. Today he wore a simple blue sweater and dark trousers, much more casual than the formal outfits he wore for official events. "Good afternoon, Captain Mitchell," George said politely. He always used Thomas's proper title, even though Thomas had told him many times that Thomas would be fine. "Good afternoon, Your Highness," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the worry gnawing at his heart. Prince George studied Thomas's face for a moment. The boy had always been observant, but today his gaze seemed particularly intense. Thomas wondered if his concern for Michael was showing on his face despite his training to remain composed. "Are you feeling all right today?" George asked quietly. "You look a bit sad." Thomas was surprised by the question. Royal guards were trained to be invisible, to blend into the background while remaining constantly alert. Most people, even those they protected, rarely noticed them as individuals. They were just part of the furniture, reliable and silent. "I'm quite well, thank you for asking, Your Highness," Thomas replied automatically. But Prince George didn't move away as he usually did. Instead, he stepped closer, his young face showing genuine concern. This wasn't the casual politeness of royal training. This was real worry from one human being to another. My grandmother always says that when people are sad, it shows in their eyes no matter how much they try to hide it, George said softly. Your eyes look worried today. Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Here was this young prince who could have anything he wanted in the world, taking time to notice the feelings of a guard. Most adults barely acknowledged Thomas existed beyond his function as protection. Sometimes grown-ups have worries, Your Highness, Thomas said carefully, but it's nothing for you to concern yourself with. Prince George tilted his head, considering this answer. Thomas could almost see the wheels turning in the boy's mind. Despite his young age, George had an old soul that seemed to understand things beyond his years. Is it about your family? George asked quietly. The simple question hit Thomas like a physical blow. How did this child know? Thomas had never spoken about his family while on duty. He had been trained to keep his personal life completely separate from his professional responsibilities. Thomas hesitated, unsure how to respond. Royal protocol suggested he should redirect the conversation back to the prince's needs and activities. But something about George's sincere concern made it difficult to give a standard, dismissive answer. The hallway fell silent except for the distant sound of other palace staff going about their duties. Thomas looked down at this young boy who would someday be king and saw not a future monarch but simply a child who cared enough to ask if someone was okay. That moment of genuine human connection in the formal, structured world of royal duty would prove to be more significant than either of them could imagine. Thomas looked down at Prince George, feeling torn between his professional training and the genuine kindness in the young boy's eyes. The question about his family hung in the air between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he should cross. Your Highness, Thomas began slowly, my son is in the hospital right now. He broke his arm at school today. The words came out before Thomas could stop them. Years of rigid protocol seemed to melt away in the face of George's sincere concern. Thomas immediately regretted sharing such personal information. Guards weren't supposed to burden the royal family with their private problems. Prince George's eyes widened with immediate sympathy. Oh no, that must hurt terribly. How old is your son? He's 8, Your Highness. His name is Michael. Thomas felt strange saying his son's name aloud in these grand palace halls. His two worlds, the formal royal environment and his warm family life, rarely mixed. Michael, George repeated thoughtfully. That's a strong name. I bet he's very brave. Thomas smiled despite his worry. He is brave, but he's also just a little boy who wants his father when he's scared. Prince George nodded seriously, as if he understood exactly what Thomas meant. Perhaps he did understand, Thomas thought. Even princes sometimes wanted their parents when things got difficult. Can you go to him? George asked. Not immediately, Thomas admitted. I need to wait for my supervisor to arrange coverage. These things take time in royal security. George frowned at this explanation. Thomas could see the wheels turning in the young prince's mind. The boy was clearly thinking about something, weighing options that Thomas couldn't guess. Follow me, George said suddenly, turning toward the main corridor. Your Highness, where are we going? Thomas asked, falling into step behind the prince as protocol demanded. To see my father, George replied simply. Thomas felt a jolt of panic. Prince William was in meetings this afternoon and interrupting. Royal schedules was strictly forbidden, except for genuine emergencies. Thomas's personal family crisis, while devastating to him, wouldn't qualify as an emergency in royal terms. Your Highness, I don't think that's necessary, Thomas said quickly. I don't want to disturb Prince William's important meetings, but George was already walking with determination down the long hallway, lined with portraits of past monarchs. His small legs moved quickly, and Thomas had to maintain a brisk pace to keep up while staying the appropriate distance behind. Sometimes important meetings are less important than helping people, George said over his shoulder. My father taught me that. They passed several other staff members who bowed politely to Prince George. Thomas noticed how the boy acknowledged each person with a smile or nod, never too busy or important to recognize their presence. This wasn't the behavior Thomas expected from someone born into ultimate privilege. As they approached Prince William's office suite, Thomas's anxiety grew. He could be written up for this breach of protocol, possibly even lose his position. but he couldn't very well tackle a young prince to stop him from seeing his own father. George knocked on the heavy wooden door of his father's office. A voice from inside called, "Come in." Prince William looked up from a stack of papers as his son entered, followed by an obviously uncomfortable Thomas. William's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "George, Thomas, what brings you here?" George walked straight to his father's desk with the confidence that came from being truly loved and welcomed. "Papa, Captain Mitchell's little boy broke his arm today and is in the hospital. But Captain Mitchell can't go to him because of royal security rules." Thomas felt his face burn with embarrassment. "Your Highness, I apologize for the interruption. Prince George insisted on coming here and I couldn't." Prince William held up a hand to stop Thomas's explanation. His expression had immediately shifted from mild curiosity to genuine concern. "How old is your son, Thomas?" William asked. 8, sir. His name is Michael." William's face softened further. As a father himself, he clearly understood the agony of having a hurt child and being unable to reach them immediately. "And he needs surgery?" William asked. "Yes, sir. My wife is with him now, but—" Thomas's voice trailed off. He didn't want to sound like he was complaining about his duties or asking for special treatment. Prince William stood up from his desk and walked around to where Thomas stood. "Thomas, you've been protecting our family for 15 years. You've missed countless moments with your own family to keep us safe." George watched this exchange with intense interest, as if he was learning something important about leadership and compassion. "Your Highness, it's my job," Thomas said. "I chose this career knowing the sacrifices involved." "Yes, but that doesn't mean we can't show flexibility when real emergencies arise," William replied. "George was absolutely right to bring this to my attention." Thomas glanced at Prince George, who gave him an encouraging smile. The boy seemed pleased that his instinct to help had been validated by his father. William picked up his phone and dialed quickly. "Marcus, it's William. I need you to arrange immediate relief coverage for Captain Mitchell. Family emergency. Yes, right away. Thank you." He hung up and turned back to Thomas. "Your replacement will be here within the hour. Go be with your son." Thomas felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. "Thank you, Your Highness. I can't express how much this means to me." "No thanks necessary," William said. "Family comes first always. That's something I hope George is learning today." Prince George nodded solemnly. "I think Captain Mitchell loves Michael the same way you love me, Papa." William smiled at his son's observation. "Exactly right, George. Love doesn't recognize titles or positions. It's the most important thing in any person's life." Thomas pulled out his phone to text Sarah that he was coming. His hand shook slightly as he typed. Soon he would be holding Michael's good hand and helping him feel brave again. "There's a car waiting downstairs," William added. "Driver will take you straight to the hospital." As they prepared to leave the office, Prince George tugged gently on Thomas's sleeve. "Will you tell Michael that a prince hopes his arm heals quickly?" Thomas knelt down to George's eye level. "I will tell him exactly that, Your Highness. And I'll tell him about the kindest young prince I've ever met." George beamed at this compliment. Maybe when Michael feels better, he could visit the palace sometime. "I'd like to meet him." Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. He would love that more than anything in the world. The simple act of one child caring about another child's pain had created something beautiful, a bridge between two very different worlds built on nothing more than human kindness. The drive to the Atir hospital felt both endless and too short. Thomas sat in the back of the royal car, watching London blur past the windows as his mind raced between gratitude and worry. Every few minutes he checked his phone for updates from Sarah, but there had been no new messages since he left the palace. When the driver pulled up to the children's hospital entrance, Thomas thanked him quickly and rushed through the automatic doors. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the sound of echoing footsteps filled his senses as he hurried toward the reception desk. "I'm looking for Michael Mitchell," he told the nurse breathlessly. 8 years old, brought in this afternoon with a broken arm. The nurse's fingers clicked across her keyboard efficiently. "Room 314, pediatric wing. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor and follow the blue line on the floor." Thomas ran toward the elevators, his heart pounding harder with each step. As the elevator climbed slowly to the 3rd floor, he tried to prepare himself for seeing his son in pain. Michael had always been such an active, fearless little boy. The thought of him lying still in a hospital bed made Thomas's chest ache. Following the blue line down a corridor decorated with colorful cartoon characters, Thomas finally reached room 314. Through the small window in the door, he could see Sarah sitting beside a small bed. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her clothes looked wrinkled from hours of worry. Thomas knocked softly and pushed open the door. Sarah looked up and her face immediately crumpled with relief. "Thomas, thank goodness you're here." Michael was awake, propped up against several pillows with his left arm in a temporary splint. His face was pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw his father. "Daddy!" Michael's voice was small but excited. "You came!" Thomas crossed the room in 3 quick steps and carefully gathered his son into his arms, mindful of the injured arm. Michael smelled like the strawberry shampoo Sarah always used for his bath time, mixed with the sterile hospital scent. "Of course I came, buddy. Nothing could keep me away from you when you're hurt." Sarah stood up and hugged them both, creating a small circle of family warmth in the clinical hospital room. "I can't believe they let you leave work so quickly," she whispered to Thomas. "I had some very special help," Thomas murmured back, thinking of Prince George's determined march to his father's office. Michael pulled back to look at his father's face. "Daddy, it hurt so much when I fell off the climbing frame, but the doctors gave me special medicine that made it stop hurting." "Tell me what happened, Michael." Michael's story tumbled out in the excited way children tell important events. He had been trying to reach the highest bar on the playground climbing frame when his hand slipped. The fall happened so fast that he didn't have time to catch himself properly. "Mrs. Johnson, my teacher, was really worried," Michael continued. "She called Mommy straight away and stayed with me until the ambulance came. She said I was very brave." Thomas stroked his son's hair, marveling at how resilient children could be. "You are very brave, Michael. Braver than any soldier I've ever met." A doctor entered the room carrying a tablet and wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile that immediately put Michael at ease. "You must be Michael's father," she said to Thomas. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I've been taking care of your son this afternoon." Dr. Chen explained that Michael's break was clean but would require surgery to insert a small pin that would help the bone heal properly. The procedure was routine for children Michael's age, and he should make a full recovery with no lasting effects. "When will the surgery happen?" Sarah asked. "We have an opening early tomorrow morning," Dr. Chen replied. "Michael will need to stay overnight for observation, but he's been such a good patient that I think he'll do wonderfully." Michael looked worried at the mention of surgery. "Will it hurt, Daddy?" Thomas sat on the edge of the hospital bed and took Michael's good hand in both of his. "The doctors will make sure you don't feel any pain during the surgery, buddy, and I'll be right here when you wake up. You won't have to go back to work?" Thomas thought about Prince William's words about family coming first. "I'm not going anywhere until you're completely better." Michael's face brightened considerably at this promise. "Really, you can stay the whole time?" "The whole time," Thomas confirmed. "In fact, I have a special message for you from someone very important." Michael's eyes widened with curiosity. "Who?" "A young prince who heard about your accident. He wanted me to tell you that he hopes your arm heals quickly." Michael's mouth fell open in amazement. "A real prince? Like in the stories Mummy reads to me?" Sarah looked at Thomas with raised eyebrows, clearly wondering how their son had come to the attention of royalty. "A real prince," Thomas confirmed. "His name is Prince George, and he's only a little bit older than you. He was very concerned when he heard about your accident." "What's he like?" Michael asked, completely captivated by this unexpected connection to royalty. Thomas thought about George's genuine concern for a stranger's child, his determination to help despite protocol, and his simple desire to meet Michael when he felt better. "He's kind and thoughtful," Thomas said. "He notices when people are sad or worried, and he tries to help them feel better. Just like you do when your friends at school are upset." Michael absorbed this information seriously. "Maybe we could be friends." "Do you think he likes football?" Thomas laughed, feeling lighter than he had all day. "I think he probably does. Most boys your age love football." Dr. Chen had been listening to this conversation with an amused smile. "It sounds like you have some very special friends, Michael. That should help you heal even faster." A nurse came in to prepare Michael for the night, bringing him a hospital gown covered in cartoon rockets and spaceships. As Sarah helped Michael change, Thomas stepped into the hallway to call his supervisor and confirm that his leave had been properly arranged. When he returned to the room, Michael was settled under the covers with a juice box and some crackers. The little boy looked so small in the big hospital bed, but his spirit seemed much improved now that both parents were there. "Daddy," Michael said thoughtfully, "when I get better, do you think I could write a thank you letter to Prince George?" Thomas smiled. "I think that would be very nice, Michael. Princes probably don't get many letters from brave boys like you." As the evening settled around them, Thomas held Sarah's hand while they watched Michael drift off to sleep. Tomorrow would bring surgery and recovery, but tonight their family was together. Thomas thought about Prince George's silent but powerful gesture of compassion, and how one child's concern for another had made all of this possible. Outside the hospital window, the lights of London twinkled like stars, connecting the palace where a young prince slept to the hospital, where another young boy dreamed of friendship and healing. 2 weeks later, Thomas returned to his duties at Kensington Palace. Michael's surgery had gone perfectly, and the little boy was already back at school, proudly showing off his bright blue cast to anyone who would look. The pin in his arm was doing its job, and Dr. Chen had predicted a full recovery within 6 weeks. Thomas felt different as he walked through the familiar palace corridors. The same portraits hung on the walls, the same ornate carpets covered the floors, but something fundamental had shifted in how he saw his role here. Prince George's simple act of kindness had reminded Thomas that behind all the protocol and formality, they were all just human beings caring for each other. As he took his position outside Prince George's study room, Thomas could hear the familiar sounds of lessons in progress. Mrs. Henderson was explaining something about geography, and Prince George was asking thoughtful questions about different countries and their cultures. When the study door opened for the afternoon break, Prince George stepped out and immediately looked at Thomas with bright, eager eyes. "Captain Mitchell, how is Michael? Is his arm feeling better?" Thomas smiled at the prince's obvious concern. "Much better, thank you for asking, Your Highness. The surgery went very well and he's already back at school." "Oh, that's wonderful news." George's face lit up with genuine happiness. "Did you tell him what I said about hoping his arm would heal quickly?" "I did, and it meant the world to him. In fact, he asked if he could write you a thank you letter." Prince George's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? I would love to receive a letter from Michael. Nobody my age has ever written to me before." Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. He finished it last night. He worked very hard on his best handwriting. George took the letter with reverent care, as if it were made of gold instead of ordinary school paper. Thomas watched as the young prince unfolded it and began to read. A smile spread across George's face as he took in Michael's earnest words. The letter was written in Michael's careful 8-year-old handwriting, with a few spelling mistakes that his parents had decided to leave uncorrected. It read, "Dear Prince George, my daddy told me you were worried about my broken arm. Thank you for caring about me even though you don't know me. That was very kind. The doctors fixed my arm with a special pin and now it's getting stronger every day. I told all my friends at school that a real prince was worried about me and they think that's the coolest thing ever. Daddy says you like football. My favorite team is Arsenal, but I also like England when they play other countries. Do you have a favorite team? I hope we can be friends. Maybe someday I can visit the palace and we can play football together if your daddy says it's okay. Thank you for helping my daddy come to the hospital when I was scared. Your new friend, Michael Mitchell. P.S. I drew you a picture of a castle because I thought you might like it." At the bottom of the letter was a colorful drawing of a castle with flags flying from its towers and a smiling, stick figure wearing a crown standing in front of it. Prince George studied the drawing carefully, as if it were a masterpiece in an art gallery. "This is beautiful," he said softly. "Look how carefully he drew all the details on the castle." "He spent 2 hours working on it," Thomas said. "He wanted it to be perfect for you." George folded the letter back up with great care. "I want to write back to him right away. Do you think he would like that?" "He would be absolutely thrilled, Your Highness." "And Captain Mitchell," George continued, "I meant what Michael wrote about playing football together. I really would like to meet him when the time is right." Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. "That would be the greatest gift you could give him, Your Highness." Prince George tucked Michael's letter safely into his pocket. "I'm going to keep this forever. It's the first letter I've ever received from a real friend." The word friend hung in the air between them. Thomas realized that despite all his privileges and position, Prince George was still just a young boy who wanted genuine connections with other children. The letter from Michael represented something precious, A friendship built on kindness rather than royal protocol. Your Highness, Thomas said carefully, if I may say so, what you did for my family showed tremendous compassion. You saw someone in need and took action to help, even though it would have been much easier to ignore the situation. George looked thoughtful. My great-grandmother always told me that being royal isn't about having privileges. It's about using whatever advantages you have to help other people. She said that's what makes a good leader. Thomas nodded, impressed by the wisdom in those words. Your great-grandmother sounds very wise. She was, George said with a touch of sadness. I miss her very much, but I try to remember her lessons every day. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, ready to resume the afternoon lessons. Your Highness, are you ready to continue with our geography lesson? Yes, Mrs. Henderson, just one moment. George turned back to Thomas. I'm going to ask Papa if we can arrange for Michael to visit the palace soon. Maybe we could have a proper football match in the garden. That sounds wonderful, Your Highness. As Prince George headed back into his study, he paused at the doorway. Captain Mitchell, thank you for trusting me enough to tell me about Michael that day. Sometimes adults don't think children can help with important things. You proved that children often understand what's most important better than adults do. Your Highness. George smiled and disappeared back into his study. Thomas resumed his position, but his mind was filled with images of his son's excited face when he learned that Prince George wanted to write back to him. That evening, Thomas would go home to find Michael practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. The 8-year-old had already started planning what he would say to Prince George when they met, practicing his football skills in the backyard despite his cast, and asking Sarah to help him think of questions a prince might like to answer. The connection between these two boys from completely different worlds had created something beautiful, a reminder that kindness and friendship could bridge any gap, whether between a palace and a hospital room, or between a future king and the son of his protector. Thomas stood at his post, listening to the murmur of geography lessons, and felt grateful for the day when Prince George had noticed his sadness and decided to do something about it. That moment of silent but powerful compassion had changed everything. 3 days later, Prince George emerged from his study carrying a beautifully written letter on official palace stationery. His face glowed with the satisfaction of someone who had just completed an important task. Captain Mitchell, he called softly, I've finished my letter to Michael. Thomas approached respectfully as George held out the envelope. The young prince had written Michael Mitchell on the front in his careful handwriting, and there was even a small drawing of a football next to the name. Would you like me to read it first? Your Highness, to make sure it's appropriate? Thomas asked. George shook his head. I want it to be a surprise for Michael, but I can tell you that I invited him to visit the palace next Saturday afternoon if his parents agree. Papa said it would be fine, and Mummy is excited to meet him too. Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. Your Highness, that's incredibly generous, but are you certain? Michael is just an ordinary boy from an ordinary family. That's exactly why I want to meet him, George replied earnestly. All my other friends have parents who work with Papa or families who are invited to official events. I've never had a friend who just wanted to be my friend because he liked me, not because I'm a prince. The simplicity and honesty of this statement struck Thomas deeply. Despite having everything material comfort could provide, Prince George was missing something that most children took for granted: authentic friendships based on genuine affection rather than social obligation. I think Michael would be honored to visit. Your Highness, should I give this to him tonight? Yes, please. And Captain Mitchell, could you also ask his parents if it would be all right for Michael to bring his football? I thought we could have a proper match in the palace gardens. Thomas smiled at the image of these two boys running around the perfectly manicured royal gardens, laughing and playing like any other children. I'm sure he would love that very much. That evening, Thomas arrived home to find Michael at the kitchen table doing his homework, his cast-covered arm resting carefully beside his notebooks. Sarah was cooking dinner, filling the modest house with the warm smell of her famous shepherd's pie. Michael, Thomas said, sitting down beside his son, I have something very special for you. Michael looked up from his mathematics problems, immediately interested. What is it, Daddy? Thomas placed Prince George's letter on the table. Michael's eyes widened when he saw the official palace seal and his own name written in elegant handwriting. Is this really for me? Michael whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make the letter disappear. "It's really for you. From Prince George himself." Sarah turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron as she came to look over Michael's shoulder. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Open it." Michael's hands trembled slightly as he carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear the beautiful paper. Inside was a single sheet of palace stationery with Prince George's neat handwriting, covering most of the page. Michael read slowly, his lips moving silently as he worked through each word. Thomas and Sarah watched his expression change from concentration to amazement to pure joy. "Mommy, Daddy," Michael finally burst out. "Prince George wants me to come to the palace on Saturday. He wants to play football with me and meet you both and show me his room in the gardens." Sarah looked at Thomas with raised eyebrows. "Is this really happening?" Thomas nodded, still somewhat amazed himself. Prince George specifically asked his parents for permission to invite Michael. Apparently he's never had a friend his own age who wasn't connected to royal duties. Michael was reading the letter again, more carefully this time. "He says he likes Arsenal too, and he wants to know if I can bring my football, because the palace gardens are perfect for playing. He also says his mummy is making special biscuits for our visit." "What do you think, Michael?" Sarah asked gently. "Would you like to visit Prince George at the palace?" Michael's face was so bright with excitement that Thomas was afraid he might actually bounce right off his chair, more than anything in the whole world. "Can we go, Mummy, please?" Sarah looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course we can go, sweetheart. But we'll need to make sure you're on your very best behavior. This is a great honor." "I'll be perfect," Michael promised solemnly. "I'll say please and thank you. And I won't run unless Prince George says it's okay, and I'll use my best table manners if we have tea." Thomas laughed at his son's earnest list of promises. "I'm sure you'll be wonderful, Michael. Prince George already thinks you're pretty special." The rest of the week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah took Michael shopping for a new outfit that would be nice enough for the palace but comfortable enough for playing football. Michael insisted on bringing his best football, which Sarah carefully cleaned until it looked brand new. Michael practiced his handshake and his polite greetings in front of the mirror, wanting to make a good impression on Prince George's parents. He also spent time thinking of questions he could ask about what it was like to live in a palace, though Thomas advised him to let the conversation flow naturally. On Friday evening, Michael was so excited he could barely eat his dinner. "Do you think Prince George is excited too?" he asked Thomas. "I think he's just as excited as you are," Thomas replied. "He's been looking forward to this all week." Michael smiled at this thought. "It's funny that a prince could be excited to meet me. I'm just regular Michael from regular school." "That's exactly why he's excited," Sarah said, stroking Michael's hair. "Sometimes being regular is the most special thing of all." Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical London weather that couldn't dampen Michael's spirits. He was dressed in his new navy blue sweater and his best jeans, with his football tucked carefully under his good arm. As they drove through the gates of Kensington Palace, Michael pressed his face against the car window, trying to take in every detail of the magnificent buildings and perfectly maintained grounds. "It's like a fairy tale," he whispered. Thomas felt a surge of pride and gratitude as he watched his son's wonder. A week ago, Michael had been a scared little boy in a hospital bed. Today, he was about to have tea with a prince who had shown compassion for a stranger's pain. The car pulled up to a side entrance where Prince George stood waiting with his parents. The young prince was dressed casually in jeans and a green jumper, clearly having chosen comfort over formality for their football match. As Michael stepped out of the car, Prince George walked forward with a genuine smile of welcome. In that moment, watching two boys meet as friends rather than prince and subject, Thomas understood that some gestures were more powerful than any ceremony or protocol. The silent kindness that had begun with Prince George noticing a guard's sadness was about to bloom into something beautiful. A friendship that would teach both boys about compassion, loyalty, and the simple joy of having someone who cared about you for exactly who you were. Prince George walked toward Michael with an easy smile, as if greeting honored guests was something he did every day. Behind him, Prince William and Catherine followed at a respectful distance, allowing the boys to meet naturally. "You must be Michael," George said, extending his hand in a gesture that was both royal and completely genuine. "I'm so glad you could come." Michael shook George's hand carefully, remembering his practice sessions in front of the mirror. "Thank you for inviting me, Your Highness. This is the most exciting day of my whole life." George laughed, a sound full of pure boyish delight. "Just call me George, please. We're going to be friends, right?" Michael nodded eagerly, his nervousness beginning to melt away in the face of George's obvious warmth. "Yes, and thank you for your letter. I've read it about 100 times." Thomas watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and amazement. His son, who had been so worried about proper protocol, was chatting with a future king as if they were meeting on a school playground. Prince William stepped forward to greet Thomas and Sarah. "Thomas, it's wonderful to see you again. And you must be Sarah. George has been talking about this visit all week." Sarah seemed slightly overwhelmed by the casual friendliness of the royal family. "Your Highness, we can't thank you enough for this invitation. Michael hasn't slept properly in days because he's been so excited." Catherine smiled warmly. "We understand completely. George has been just as excited. It's not often he gets to meet someone who wants to be his friend simply because they like him." Michael held up his football proudly. "I brought my very best ball, just like you asked in your letter." George's eyes lit up. "Perfect. I've been practicing my footwork all week. I hope you're ready for some serious competition." "My cast doesn't slow me down much," Michael said confidently. "I've been playing football in our garden every day since the doctor said it was okay." "Then let's go," George said, already heading toward the gardens. "I want to show you the best football pitch in all of London." The palace gardens were even more magnificent than Michael had imagined. Perfectly trimmed hedges created natural boundaries, while ancient oak trees provided shade and character. George led them to a section of lawn that was indeed perfect for football. Flat, green, and just the right size for two boys to run freely. "This is where I practice when my tutors aren't watching," George confided with a mischievous grin. "Sometimes Papa joins me, but he's getting old and slow." Prince William laughed from where he and the other adults had settled on a nearby bench. "I heard that, young man." George winked at Michael. "See, old and slow. We'll definitely beat him if he tries to join our game." For the next hour, Thomas and Sarah watched their son play football with a prince in the gardens of Kensington Palace. The boys ran and laughed and shouted with the pure joy of children who had found a perfect playmate. Michael's cast seemed forgotten as he chased after the ball, and George played with the uninhibited enthusiasm of someone finally free from royal formality. "Goal," Michael shouted as he managed to kick the ball past George's attempted save. "Brilliant shot," George called back, grinning as he retrieved the ball. "You're much better than my usual opponents." "Who do you usually play with?" Michael asked, accepting George's compliment with obvious pleasure. George's expression grew slightly more serious. "Mostly just my protection officers when they have time. Or sometimes Papa, but he's usually too busy with royal duties." Michael seemed to understand instinctively that this was a moment requiring sensitivity. "Well, now you have me. If your parents say it's okay, maybe I could come play football with you sometimes." George's face brightened immediately. "Would you really want to? Even if it means coming all the way to the palace?" "Are you kidding?" Michael laughed. "This is the best football pitch I've ever seen. Plus, you're really good at passing." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion as he watched his son offer friendship so naturally. Michael had no agenda, no desire for royal favors or social advancement. He simply saw another boy who loved football and wanted to play. Catherine appeared beside them, carrying a tray of sandwiches and homemade biscuits. "I thought you boys might be getting hungry." The impromptu picnic that followed was unlike anything Thomas had ever experienced in his years of royal service. There was no formal protocol, no careful arrangement of seating or conversation topics. It was simply two families sharing food and laughter. On a beautiful afternoon, Michael told George about his school, his friends, and his dream of playing football for England someday. George shared stories about his tutoring, his love of geography, and his secret ambition to visit every country in the world. "Do you think being a king would stop you from traveling?" Michael asked with the directness that only children possess. George considered this seriously. "I think being king means I'll get to travel a lot, but it might not always be for fun. I'll have to visit places for important meetings and ceremonies." "That sounds lonely," Michael observed. "Will you have friends to travel with you?" "I hope so," George said, looking at Michael meaningfully. Good friends are the most important thing anyone can have, royal or not. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas noticed how relaxed Prince William and Catherine seemed. They laughed at the boys' jokes, joined in their games when invited, and treated Sarah and himself like old friends rather than employees. "This is exactly what George needed," Catherine said quietly to Sarah as they watched the boys attempt to teach each other football tricks. "He's been surrounded by adults and formal structure for so long. Michael reminds him how to just be a child." Sarah smiled. "Michael has been glowing ever since he received George's letter. You've given him something magical to believe in." When it was time to leave, both boys looked genuinely disappointed. They had become real friends in the space of a few hours, connected by shared interests and the simple pleasure of each other's company. "Can Michael come back soon?" George asked his parents hopefully. "Of course," William replied. "In fact, we were thinking Michael might like to join us for some of George's birthday celebration next month. Nothing too formal, just cake and games in the garden." Michael's eyes went wide. "Really? I could come. To a prince's birthday party?" "You'd better come," George said firmly. "It won't be any fun without my best friend there." As they said their goodbyes, George pulled Thomas aside. "Captain Mitchell, thank you for telling me about Michael that day when you were worried. I'm so glad we became friends." Thomas knelt down to George's level. "Thank you, Your Highness, for caring enough to help a guard's family. You showed me what true leadership looks like." George smiled. "Mummy says the best leaders are the ones who notice when people need help and do something about it. I learned that from watching you protect our family all these years." As they drove away from the palace, Michael chattered excitedly about every moment of the visit. But Thomas found himself thinking about Prince George's words. The young prince had learned about service and compassion by watching the adults around him, including a royal guard who had simply been doing his job with dedication and care. In trying to protect the royal family, Thomas had unknowingly taught a future king about the importance of noticing and helping others. And in return, that young prince had given Thomas's son a friendship that would last a lifetime. 6 months had passed since that first hospital visit, and the friendship between Prince George and Michael had blossomed into something truly special. What had begun as a moment of compassion had grown into regular weekend visits, shared birthday celebrations, and a bond that transcended the vast differences in their circumstances. Thomas stood at his familiar post outside Prince George's study, but now his role felt different. He was no longer just a silent protector. He had become a bridge between two worlds, helping to nurture a friendship that was teaching both boys valuable lessons about loyalty, kindness, and genuine human connection. Today was particularly significant. Prince George had asked his parents for permission to visit Michael's home for the first time. The idea of a future king spending a Saturday afternoon in a modest suburban house had required careful consideration from the royal security team, but Prince William had insisted that normal childhood experiences were essential for his son's development. "Captain Mitchell," George called out as he emerged from his study with a wrapped gift under his arm. "Is everything ready for my visit to Michael's house?" Thomas smiled at the excitement in the young prince's voice. "Everything is arranged, Your Highness. The security team has done their advance work, and your parents have approved all the plans." George clutched his gift more tightly. "I hope Michael likes what I brought him. Mummy helped me choose it, but I picked it out myself." "What did you get him?" Thomas asked, curious about what a prince might give to a regular 8-year-old boy. "A football signed by the entire England team," George said proudly. "Papa arranged it through his contacts with the Football Association, but I also made something myself." George pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package from his pocket. "I wrote a book about our friendship. It has pictures I drew and stories about all the fun times we've had together. I thought Michael might like to keep it forever." Thomas felt a familiar warmth in his chest. Despite all his privileges and access to expensive gifts, Prince George had chosen to give his friend something personal and meaningful. "I think that might be the most special gift Michael has ever received, Your Highness." The drive to Michael's neighborhood took them through parts of London that Prince George rarely saw. He pressed his face to the car window, taking in the bustling high street, The local parks filled with children playing and the rows of terraced houses where ordinary families lived their daily lives. It's so different from the palace, George observed, but not in a negative way. His tone suggested fascination rather than judgment. Most people live like this, Your Highness, Thomas explained gently. Small houses, neighborhood schools, local shops. It's a different kind of life, but it can be very happy. George nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand why Michael is so confident and friendly. He gets to meet lots of different people every day instead of just tutors and royal staff. When they arrived at the Mitchell house, Michael was waiting at the front window, his face pressed against the glass. The moment the royal car pulled up, he disappeared from view, and seconds later the front door burst open. George. Michael called out, running down the small garden path with his cast-free arms swinging happily. The pin had been removed the week before, and Michael was thrilled to have full use of both arms again. Prince George stepped out of the car with a genuine smile of delight. Michael, your arm looks completely better. The two boys hugged with the unself-conscious affection of true friends. Thomas watched this greeting and marveled at how natural their friendship had become. There was no awkwardness about royal protocol or social differences, just two boys happy to see each other. Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking slightly nervous but welcoming. She had spent the morning cleaning the house from top to bottom, even though Thomas had assured her that Prince George wouldn't notice or care about anything except spending time with Michael. Your Highness, Sarah said with a small curtsy. Welcome to our home, George smiled warmly. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Mitchell. Michael has told me so much about your house that I feel like I already know it. Michael grabbed George's hand and began pulling him toward the front door. Come on. I want to show you my room and my football trophies and the garden where I practice my kicks. As the boys disappeared into the house, chattering excitedly, Sarah turned to Thomas with a look of amazement. I still can't believe this is real. A prince is having a play date in our sitting room. Thomas put his arm around his wife's shoulders. It's real because George sees Michael as a true friend, not as a subject or a fan. That's the rarest gift anyone could give a future king. Inside the house, they could hear Michael giving George a comprehensive tour. This is the kitchen where Mummy makes the best shepherd's pie in England. This is the sitting room where we watch football matches on television. And this is my room. George's voice carried clearly down the stairs. Michael, I love your room. All these football posters are brilliant and you have so many books. Mummy reads to me every night, Michael explained proudly. She says reading helps your brain grow stronger. For the next several hours, Thomas and Sarah watched their modest home transform into a playground for two boys who had forgotten all about royal titles and social positions. They played video games, kicked a football around the small back garden, and built an elaborate fort using couch cushions and blankets. During lunch, George insisted on helping Sarah in the kitchen, fascinated by the process of making sandwiches and pouring juice. At the palace, everything just appears on a tray, he explained to Michael. I never get to help make anything myself. Michael looked shocked by this revelation. You mean you've never made your own sandwich? Never, George admitted. Could you teach me? What followed was an impromptu cooking lesson that had both boys covered in jam and laughing hysterically. Sarah took pictures with her phone, knowing that these memories would be treasured long after the boys had grown up. When it was time for gift-giving, George presented his offerings with visible excitement. Michael's eyes went wide when he saw the signed football, but it was the handmade book that truly captured his heart. You made this for me? Michael asked, carefully turning each page and examining George's drawings and stories. Every word and every picture, George confirmed. I wanted you to have something that showed how important our friendship is to me. Michael hugged the book to his chest. This is the best present anyone has ever given me. I'm going to keep it forever and show it to my children someday. As the afternoon drew to a close, both boys seemed reluctant to end their time together. They had spent hours in Michael's world, and George clearly didn't want to return to the formal structure of palace life. When can you come back? Michael asked as they sat in the garden, watching the sun set over the neighborhood rooftops. As often as my parents will let me, George replied. I love coming here. Everything feels so normal and happy. Michael considered this thoughtfully. Maybe being normal is pretty special after all. As they prepared to leave, Prince George pulled Thomas aside for a private conversation. "Captain Mitchell, I want to thank you for something important." "What's that, Your Highness?" "For showing me that the best way to help people is to notice when they need something, and then actually do something about it. If I hadn't seen you worried about Michael that day, I never would have learned how good it feels to help a friend." Thomas knelt down to meet George's eyes. "Your Highness, you taught me something equally important. You showed me that true leadership isn't about giving orders or following rules. It's about caring for others even when it's not your job to do so." George smiled. "I think Michael is teaching us both how to be better people." As the royal car pulled away from the Mitchell house, Thomas reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a moment of silent concern. Prince George's simple gesture of noticing a guard's sadness had created a friendship that was enriching both boys' lives in ways that no formal education could provide. Michael was learning about compassion, service, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. George was discovering the joy of authentic relationships and the value of ordinary experiences. And Thomas had gained a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve, not just as a protector, but as a positive influence in a young prince's moral development. The most powerful gesture had indeed been silent. A child's wordless recognition that someone was in pain and needed help. From that single moment of empathy had grown a friendship that would shape both boys' characters and remind everyone around them that kindness was the most important lesson anyone could learn, royal or not. As they drove through the evening streets of London, Thomas smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of watching over a young prince who was growing into exactly the kind of leader the world needed. One who understood that true power came not from position or privilege, but from the simple act of caring about others and taking action to help them when they needed it most.